So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming to this session about OSPOs, or Open Source Program Offices. My name is Boris Baldassari. I work for the Eclipse Foundation as an open source consultant, so I assume that I don't have to introduce the Eclipse Foundation. I'm involved in the OSPO Alliance initiative and in the Good Governance initiative, so we'll talk about that later on. And my partner for this talk is Daniel.
Hey. Hi everyone, thank you for joining today and for being here the very last day of the conference, because we know that people left yesterday, some of them. So I'm currently the CEO of Izquierdo, co-founder of the company. I'm part of the governing board of the CHAOS community, that stands for Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. And I'm VP at the Inner Source Commons Foundation, so if you want to discuss about metrics, inner source or OSPOs, here we are.
So some background about this talk and why we are here and so on. So does anybody don't know what an OSPO is in this room? Okay, thank you. So we'll start from there. An OSPO, Open Source Program Office, is a team or a person within an organization that takes care of everything open source within the organization. So that includes the ins, how they consume software, that includes the outs, how they produce software, open source software, and also everything within, so that means the legal department, that means the training, the HR, whatever is needed to properly manage open source within the organization is managed by the OSPO, and the idea is to have a point of contact for people within the organization when they have a question about how to do open source software, how to consume it, and so on. Having a single point of contact to make sure that it's done properly. It's a growing trend these last years. So companies come to use a lot of software, come to realize that they use a lot of open source software, of course, and at some point they decide to manage it. So that sounds like easy, but for some companies that have never done open source, that's a daunting task, and most of the time they don't even know how to start. They have no roadmap, they don't know how to do it well, and so on. And so here comes the OSPO Alliance. So it's an initiative to help organizations build their OSPO and manage open source software correctly and properly within the organization. So the OSPO Alliance is a European-based initiative. We provide a safe place for people to communicate, ask questions, share their mistakes and best practices. Within the OSPO Alliance, we have a subgroup that is the Good Governance Initiative. So that's a framework and handbook, a practical handbook with a list of activities, so steps that you can take to build your open source program office, how to do it with hits and tips from our experience to build it well and make it a success. Bitergia has been a long time expert on everything metrics. They started from the academic field. They worked on a bunch of open source projects, so that includes PolarSys. They work with foundations. They produce the Grimoire Lab tooling, so which is a tool that collects, collects data, aggregate them, and publish them. It's of course an open source project. And they provide consultancy about OSPO and inner source to organizations. We already worked together on this thing, so we, in the OSPO Alliance, we have a series of monthly webinars where people come to present their experience and expertise and mistakes and successes with OSPOs. So you come here, there is no registration, you just come here. There is a presentation, and then there is an open forum, so you can really ask any type of question, and that's a great place to exchange. And Daniel came and gave a talk about how to use metrics to measure the success of the deployment of your OSPO. And so the whole question of this talk, so we will introduce the OSPO Alliance and the Good Governance Handbook, and we'll talk about the metrics that we can use to actually track how you perform regarding OSPO, open source, OSPO within your organization. Excuse me. A few more words about the OSPO Alliance. So it was launched in 2021 by European non-profit organizations. The goal is really to help by any means the organizations with open source. So that includes for them to lower the risks, the legal risks, and to reassure them. But we also push them to contribute back, to contribute upstream, and to really contribute to the ecosystem as a whole. It's governed by open source principles, so we work like an open source project, even if there is no real code within, but we apply the open source principles. So we are absolutely open to all. We work collaboratively. We work with a meritocratic governance model. Everybody is welcome, so really no restriction on who can join any type of organization based anywhere in the world. We do respect members' privacy, so we don't collect your data, we don't spam you. You just come as you are, and that's well. The OSPO Alliance, so we have the OSPO Alliance website with a bunch of resources. We have a mailing list where people can exchange about their OSPO, ask questions about what kind of tool, open source tool you would use for that task, things like that. We have a monthly webinar series where, as I said, people come and present their experience and knowledge and share their knowledge about OSPOs with this safe place to discuss it afterwards. And we have the Good Governance Initiative, which is this handbook to help practically people build, define, and build their OSPO. So we've published the first version of this handbook last year, in November last year. That was the 1.0 version. We have been working since then on the 1.1 updates. So there are a few new features that I will introduce later on. And so our next release is planned for early November. Who is the OSPO Alliance? So as I said, it was funded by European-based non-profit organization. It's absolutely vendor neutral, organization neutral. Participation is open to all. We wanted it to be a low barrier place, so you can really come, there is no fee, there is no commitment. We just ask for a signed statement of support saying that you're interested in open source and you support the OSPO Alliance. So it's really easy to join. We already have a bunch of wonderful members of any type, of any type. So there are SMEs, big corporations, there are academics, there are administrations, and you can find them all on the OSPO Alliance website. Concerning the Good Governance Initiative Handbook, so it's really a framework that provides guidance about how to define, so build your roadmap for your OSPO, and we give practical steps to implement to build your OSPO, so things like identify your dependencies, manage your vulnerabilities, provide trainings to the developers, educate your executives, do HR properly regarding open source, things like that. This guidance and framework is organized in 5 goals. So that start from realizing that you have open source within your organization, because as we know, everybody has, to building a culture around it, to engaging with the community, to making it a strategic asset for the organization, hence the educating the executives. And we present it in a nice way, so that's really easy to visualize and follow as you deploy it. So the little steps I was talking about to build your OSPO are called activities. So there are a few examples here, from inventory of open source skills and resources to managing software dependencies, building key indicators to follow up on the deployments, communicating with stakeholders, things like that. Each activity is built on the same, according to the same structure. So for each activity, you have a description of what this activity is about, an opportunity assessment to help you know when and why you could target this specific activity at this time. There are indicators proposed to measure the progress of this activity, so to help you know if you're making progress and when it's completed. We have some recommendations from our experience, because it was built by something like 15 active contributors and experienced software practitioners. And we have a list for each of these activities of tools and resources that you can use to dive deeper into this specific topic. We intended the Good Governance Initiative Handbook for any type of organization, so from SMEs to big corps to academics to administrations. So, of course, it's a very generic framework, so some activities might not be relevant to your specific case, but that's okay, you just remove them. And we also provide a way to adapt the activities to your own local context. So you start from the activity and you create what we call a scorecard that reflects the activity but adapted to your own local context. So that you, in the scorecard you would put the resources that you need, the teams and the person that you need to work with, what would be required from the legal department and things like that. You describe and define your own measurements for your progress, so what will be the objectives that you will have to complete it. So that's really a great way to start from this generic templates to make it really your own development adapted to your own situation. Among the new features that is secret, it's going to be published in 2 weeks' time. But a few insights about what we have been doing. So now we have translations of the handbook. The German and French translations are already officially published, and we are working on new other translations. We do use the Weblate open source project. So Weblate is an open source project to help translate open source projects. That's great. We crowdsource it, so anybody can just come and see, oh, I love this, I want it translated into my own native language, and that works really well. So we have the Portuguese, Spanish, and Italian translations on the way, and we are working with many other people. So even people we don't even know sometimes that come and start their own translations, and so that's great, especially for the administrations who generally want to work with material in their own language. We also propose now a really easy means to deploy the GGI program within your own organization on any type of GitLab instance. So it can be a private, public, community, or commercial edition. So what we provide is a repository that you just clone on your own GitLab, on any GitLab instance. It creates all the activities as GitLab issues. We create a board to help you visualize them, so it looks like this. It's really easy to have an overview and to play with them, go in each activity, check what's in it, and so on. And we also provide a GitLab page with a static website that reflects your own progress on your own scorecards, so your adaptation of the activities, and that helps you track and track your activities, your progress, and help you communicate with your stakeholders, executives, teams, and so on. It has already been deployed. I cannot give names because that's hard to have the rights to say they did it, but it has been deployed, it is being deployed, and it has been deployed in quite a few big corps and administrations. So it's quite a success. Once again, we are open, even if there is no commitment required. We highly appreciate when people contribute, share their experience, and ask questions, yeah, exchange about all of this. So please take a picture of this. The official website is ospo.zone. The Good Governance Initiative work is happening at a GitLab instance at OW2. We have mailing lists, so one of them is the generic mailing list to exchange about anything open source and OSPOs. And we have a specific mailing list for the Good Governance Initiative handbook. We also have a contributing guide, and we clearly communicate on our governance model, and so on and so on. Just a note of warning: we are in the process of changing the domain name, so we are kind of refactoring our marketing and communication, but we will set up redirect, so don't worry. As I said, the GGI handbook has received an enthusiastic reception. It has already been deployed at various organizations. We have a great feedback. It really helps people. We're really happy with that. And we want to continue working on it, improving its content, probably defining new activities, updating the resources. We will have more translations. We will improve our deployments feature, possibly on multiple platforms. And one thing that we want to introduce during the next round of updates is the integration of metrics to help you measure your progress and your success on the OSPO deployments within your organizations. So if we need metrics, we need Daniel.
Oops. Yeah, thank you. Okay, thank you, Boris. So just to bring some more context here, so part of the discussion we had was because I was invited to the ONRAP meeting, so thank you for that. And we were discussing about OSPO metrics depending on the hat you were wearing. So that depends if you are a, I don't know, community manager or a program manager or a developer advocate, or you work as a chief something in your company. So then your view on the metrics that matter are slightly different. So if you think about the goals, there are many different goals. So from a marketing perspective, probably you are interested in measuring impact, right? Or maybe you want to show like there is certain neutrality in the, in the Eclipse Foundation, because then this is a good, trigger to bring some more companies to the discussion. So the thing is, how can we use metrics effectively for each of our basically jobs or each of our hats? Because if I ask you what is the metric that matters to you, probably we have like 20 different metrics here, right? So then it's about making sense of all of this. The Good Governance Initiative is, building and structuring all of this way of thinking. And then what basically we were discussing that might be, there is a space for improvement, is basically metrics, how we can measure that, and there are some defined. But today's presentation is about, well, working on those, discussing what all of these matter to you, basically. So the question here is this thing. So what is your goal within the corporation? Do you work do you work with people? So then maybe you are discussing about talent attraction, or, there is a talent war out there about developers, and specifically open source developers. Maybe it's about internal marketing. Maybe it's because you are the CTO. Maybe it's because you work in security. Maybe you are the community manager of certain projects. So depending on who you are, you may have different interest in this. An example of this, so this is an analysis of the whole CNCF ecosystem. 2-3 years ago, each of the pink dots are developers, okay? And then there is a connection between a developer and a project if that person committed something, so produce a piece of code. This is only focused on Git activity. So then we can see that the CNCF repository basically is mainly Kubernetes, and then there are like satellite projects here and there. It happens that there are developers that are participating in more than one project. So then we can see that there are some people that suddenly they are, bridging Kubernetes with Falco, for instance. And then it happens all around the community. So what is scary typically to corporations coming into open source, and OSPO, or the Good Governance Initiative, is helping to mitigate that risk, is all of this thing in the middle. So this is basically chaos. That's a messy collaboration path. But this is the beauty of open source. This is collaboration. This is what we would love to see basically anywhere, right? When we are contributing, even within the corporation. That, by the way, that's inner source, about bringing good open source practices within the corporation. So the thing is that, hey, let's now focus on a marketing person, let's say for the CNCF community. So probably the marketing person will say, I would love to show this chart because this is giving us like a sense of size, of shape, of how we are growing, how great we are as a community. But then if we think about the CTO of a company or some person in charge of a strategy, then probably that person is starting to think, okay, who else is participating in Kubernetes? Because Kubernetes is a key technology for us. So then what other companies are there? How are they influencing the roadmap? Okay, how they are participating in other projects? But because perhaps we are just consumers of the technology, but we are not producers. So if we are not in the open source projects, basically others will decide the roadmap for us. And then having data is one of those first steps, at least to be aware of what's going on out there, right? Yeah, and if you are, I don't know, a community manager, probably one of the things you want to do is to welcome newcomers. So then what if you know people in the community that probably you know because you're a community manager, and you say, well, there is a connection between this person and this person. So then, because I know this person, I will ask that person to introduce me to the other. So then it's much easier, to start building networks and relationships and so on. So again, depending on the hat you are wearing, you may look at this chart in a really different ways, right? Other example, totally different, performance. So we are not talking about community or so, we are talking about efficiency in the development process. So depending on you are engineering or you are a CTO or so, ideally, you may have from a company perspective, you might be interested in understanding that the median time to merge in general in the project is less than 1 day. That's good, because then probably you have your own data for internal software development process. So you need to aggregate that open source data to your internal process, because then you can be more effective when predicting how long it's going to take the next release. Because you know that you are adopting open source technology, there are always certain bugs or maybe a release or so, so then that's going to take a certain amount of days or months. So then you are introducing that into your data-driven way of thinking in the company. Hope you are working in that way in the company. Ideally, again, having data from open source projects, that's good. If you are wearing another hat, which is a more engineering discussion within the community, then you can have the data to say, well, there is, of course, always room for improvement. So are we good? Because sometimes what I find when I have the discussion is, we need to improve, we need to improve. But the question I have is, okay, how much? Because the problem is that you don't know how good you are doing in the community. So first step is about creating awareness. Next step is about, having certain guidelines by those metrics, so then you can keep improving slowly into the path. Ideally, those metrics should be owned by anyone in the community. So it's not that the upper management is taking care of the metrics and these are the metrics that matter. Probably that's a wrong answer. So ideally, everyone in the community, let's say developers from X project, would like to sit down and say, okay, what are the metrics that matter to us? In the same way that you have a roadmap for development, what are the metrics? We'd like to be this effective with this number of metrics. So basically you are kind of having goals in front of you, and then you see if you are going faster, better, perhaps worse, that depends. In the charts we can see here, this is, again, for the CNCF, the data I produce or we were producing. We have now data for Oniro project for later. But this is, we can see that, for instance, the lead time, which is the time to close, is growing slowly. This is the average. This is the median time. So that's why those are different, the numbers. And then you can see the rate, which is, there is a metric in maintenance, which is called backlog management index. This is basically how good the community or the project is closing things versus the new things that are coming to the project. So that means numbers around 1 means that you are closing almost everything, right, that comes. So you are basically as effective closing than new things are coming. If you are under this number, that means that you are leaving open certain percentage in a consistent way. So basically your backlog is kind of growing and growing and growing, okay? So this community is basically consistently leaving open like a 5% of the pull request or the merge request, depending on the infra you are working at. And well, that's something to have in mind. So that's why they have suddenly, the peak is over, because basically they are closing a lot here and here, and in some cases, maybe they went on vacation. Well, yeah, that's Christmas time. So basically, closing things like hell, and then here they had Christmas time. So they are kind of dealing with the backlog, in this case, by working a lot in certain periods of time. Probably that's release time. I'm not that aware of the CNCF ecosystem. So where to start at? Going back to the good governance initiative discussion. So we thought, well, maybe we can create more activities. So there are different goals that we can follow, or perhaps for each of the existing metrics, for each of the existing tasks, we can create some more metrics, which are basically the associate metrics to each task, to each activity. Or we can create some metrics framework in parallel. So initially, we discussed, well, let's go to this because we can build on whatever it's already there. So, and we see what it's there now. So many words here, don't worry that much. On the right, so this is a scorecard. Boris, if I'm using the wrong concept, let me know, because you are the expert in good governance initiative. So this is split into the description, the opportunity assessment, the progress assessment, how good you are doing, basically tools that you can use, recommendations and resources. It doesn't matter about the small words there, don't worry, it's just to let you know that there is this structured way of, a consistent way to work across the different goals. Remember the goals that I presented at the beginning, impact, influence, So there are others defined for the good governance initiative. And then, specifically for the progress assessment, they are defining this. So there is a clear and official path for people willing to contribute. Well, yeah, this sounds like process. Developers are encouraged to contribute back to open source projects they use. Yeah, process. Basically, there is perhaps a rewarding system or so. A process is in place to ensure legal compliance and security of contributions by developers. Well, compliance, licenses, and so on. And then there is a certain definition here, which is volume of contributors, code, mailing list, issues, maybe a volume of teams, volume of entities. So these are the metrics. So the point here is each time we are defining a policy, probably what we need to have is how we are measuring if this policy is basically successful or not. So then we have the metrics. The question I have for this, because this is as you can see, briefly defined, right? Well, first, what does it mean code? Are we talking about source code, lines of code? Are we talking about documentation in the files? So what is code for you? Perhaps we have different definitions, right? It's the same for commits. Are we talking about all the commits? Do we ignore merge commits? Do we have to take into account commits done by bots or maybe automated ways? So there are many ways of measuring things here. And depending who we are, we might be interested in some of them and perhaps not all of them. So I would say that metrics are like colors, as we were discussing before, right? So you have your own preferred metrics, I have mine. But we need to make sense of all of this. So for instance, another question I have is, do we want to measure quantity, volume? Or do we want to measure quality, which is perhaps really specific and complex pieces of code here and there? So just by having volume, maybe it's not, really well defined. So then we need to really document things here and there. So the next slides and the previous one were gathered by Grimoire Lab, which is an open source tool that you can use. This is part of the Chaos project, Community Health Analytics for Open Source Software. It's about community health. You are more than welcome to join as well. Just really quick, so this is a data flow usual business, let's say. So first thing, you have the data sources, original data sources. You can think of GitHub, GitLab, Atlassian Stack, Slack, IRC channels, mailing lists. So basically all information that you can see in an open source project, you can gather that information. Then this is basically gathered in this part. Then you are storing the information to have consistent, historical, and persistent information. There is a GDPR part here, so then all private information goes there, just in case, for opt-in, opt-out, and all of this. And then there are the part where information is much closer to the business layer. I'm going to fall down one of these days. And those databases are the ones that are going to tell us, okay, we have this number of people, we have this number of companies, this is taking this long to close things, etc., etc. And then, of course, the final part at the very end is about visualization. So 3-4 steps, nothing new, nothing, it's not rocket science. But it's open source. Python-based, by the way, if someone is interested there. Yeah, there are 30+ data sources supported, 70+ dashboards out of the box in case you want to play with them. Yeah, numbers for Oniro project. So we were discussing about volume, we were discussing about people. Okay, good, so how are we doing? You can see that some KPIs at the very beginning, right? So we have total contributors, and then you can have the total contributors for each of the data sources. So in the case of Git, we are talking about people doing commits. In the case of GitLab, that means people that are doing issues, right? So basically open issues and participating there. So we can see that most of the activity is taking place at the Git level. In general, we have like 150 contributors all across these two data sources. Oniro is using other data sources, so it's a matter of bringing those, and then you will have basically different numbers. You can, of course, have different trends over time. So we can see that for Oniro project, well, they, like around, Christmas time, this is, by the way, x-axis is time in both cases. Y-axis is about contributors that are active, okay? And what we can see is that over time, the activity in the project grows, and then at some point they are decreasing. Basically, at the very end, we are in October 2022. And then the green bars are telling us, well, positive gap between that moment and the previous one. And then at the bottom, what we can see is that, well, what were the moments in time for Oniro that were over the average in terms of number of contributors, and then under the average in terms of number of contributors. So they had a really active, basically, development process between March and September. I guess they were working in some milestones. The good thing about this is, by the way, that I don't have a clue about your context. I bring data, right? So then it's really important, your context, your knowledge in the field, because then you will say, okay, yeah, that makes sense, because maybe they were doing, they were working on a release, or they were working in this or that, or maybe there are people, a company left the project, but I don't know that, yeah.
I've been told they are working until September, and then basically they're on the road on shows and conferences. That's all it goes.
Okay, so that's context. Thank you. So that's a really good point. So then maybe it's like they are now rock stars going around and saying this is Oniro, and that makes sense. Yeah, so this is, these are some numbers, and then of course you have filters. So you have the time filter on the top right that you can say this is data for 1 year, but we can go for the last 6 months, you can go per release, you can go for the last six years, well, that depends. And then you can have some others as data sources, organizations, projects, etc. So that depends on who, the type of information you are interested in. Again, this heavily depends on the hat you are wearing. If you are a community manager, you might be interested in, not perhaps that much in organizations, but understanding if there are blockers. But if you are an organization, maybe you would like to see how others are doing. Well, different hats, different metrics, that's all. Metrics, some recommendations from the field of metrics. First, document everything as much as possible, right? Because whatever we are defining a commit is, did we have in mind merge? Did we have in mind bots or not? So it's about having that clearly defined. So then in 1.5 years, basically, we can come back and say, okay, we were using these KPIs to measure success in my community, whatever they are, it doesn't matter. But at least they are, they are archivable and they can be referenced afterwards, open source, right? Then I would say bring business to the metrics definition. So it's something that the Good Governance Initiative is doing. It's about following certain process for the goal question metric approach. So then you have metrics much closer to whatever your interest is, right? As a community manager, as a developer, and so on. I would say embed metrics if possible in the decision-making process. Not have metrics as a goal. No, we are all good. No. So be sure that metrics are another tool, basically, for you. And sometimes it makes sense, sometimes it doesn't make sense. And perhaps one of the most important is the last one, which is don't track people and agree with people what to track, which is, I mean, I don't like to be tracked, but I would like to be part of the conversation to define the metrics that will be part of the, of the success of the project. That's all. Because if not, it's like, okay, some people are tracking my thing, even if we are in open source, that data sources are publicly available, and then we can safely claim that we are in attributing to people what they are doing, but in any case, that's it. And then open questions on next steps, definition of metrics, perhaps we can create some dashboards and so on. But anyway, let's go to the conclusion. In a nutshell, so Good Governance Initiative Handbook, helps you build your OSPO. open source program office. So this is focused mainly on corporations. Ideally, we'd like to have for next steps the good governance initiative deployment more data-driven, so basically have metrics in the discussion. Well, join us, participate in the discussion. There are some links here for the OSPO Alliance, the Good Governance Initiative, Grimoire Lab Metrics Tooling, and Chaos Community Health. By the way, Chaos is a Linux Foundation project. I don't know if I can say here Linux Foundation project, but just in case. This is all. Boris, would you like to add something else?
I think we are good. Thank you very much. And if you have questions, do we have time for questions, actually?
Yes.
Okay, so.
Well, we'll be around if you prefer to have a coffee or so, happy to. Coffee is not really good, but you can have coffee.
Yes?
Yeah, Christian. Oh, you want third game.
Thanks for the presentation. This, I think, goes clearly in the right direction. I was wondering the templates that you're using, or these descriptions of these 25 topics that you can use to track your improvement or your progress. It seems to be quite textual based, which I guess is fine in order to get what it's all about. From my experience, as soon as you start trying to implement that, you are quickly in a situation where you are nagging people for getting the input data. So I guess it's a crucial part of the whole process to I don't know, to link into or to hook into the environment that the people are working with every day and gathering the data as you go on the fly without them even noticing. Because filling out reporting sheets is what everybody hates from my point of view. So I guess that is why you try to introduce these metrics toolings in order to get the metrics from scratch. But I guess some of the other things are not so much related to GitHub commits, if you will, or pull request numbers, but of a more qualitative nature. And I was wondering, do you have any idea of how to make this more bearable for the normal developer to be a part of this without being nagged all the time, with interviews and questions being asked? And I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Do you want to start with the first part, maybe?
So that's a really good point. Good point. Thank you. So the thing is, you're not supposed to ask to all your developers to answer the questions. These activities are rather for the person in charge of the OSPO. So they will take the burden of adapting to scorecards, understanding what it means, and then the developers and the legal department and the HR and so on are not even supposed to see the scorecards, actually. So they can if they want, but that's the framework. So that's a list of tasks you should do. Then how you do it and how you communicate with your team is rather part of the methodology. And there is probably some room for improvements regarding that part, how you go to your teams and how you build the relationship and so on. So what I mean is that the activities are a template and they give insights, but then it doesn't say anything about how you manage that from a human perspective. So it's rather on the OSPO to do things well, and after reading the activity saying, okay, so I have to make contact with this department, I know these people, I know how to talk with them. So yeah, so there is some work to do.
So that's exactly my point, because from my experience, the solution these people come up with is creating Excel sheets that they send out. Can you answer these questions for me?
So if they ask us about how to do that, we would clearly say, don't do it that way.
And I guess that would also be a good contribution to it, meaning please do not send out Excel sheets, but be a little more creative about how this can be implemented in your organization to improve your overall process where this data is being gathered automatically. I don't know. So you need to put some more work into this from my point of view, instead of simply creating more Excel sheets that people have to report on. Everybody hates that. They are the worst
probably,
from my point of view.
Marketing soft skills, probably, yes. That's a really good point, and so I didn't talk a lot about that, but we have a few pages of introduction about the methodology, and we say something like that, but you're absolutely right, we should probably stress it out a bit more and make it clear that you're not supposed to send Excel sheets to the people. But another point is that we don't want to interfere with the ways the organization works, because that's far too diverse for us to manage that. So we have to trust at some point the OSPO and the people there. But a strong word of warning is needed and not taken. Thank you.
Just for a marketing perspective, just to save a little bit. No, but I guess the problem is also where the data remains, where is the data, and a lot of times the systems are not interconnected. So, and you have in a big organization people accessing that data, and then those are the only ones that can access, so that's really, really a problem. And
the point is, you need to break that up.
Totally.
Yeah. Are serious about this, you need to invest some work.
Agree.
To make it accessible.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. It's the connection and the automation of this pumping the data and really understanding the metrics. But just wanted to say something from the marketing perspective.
Let's continue that around coffee. Any other question?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day.
Yeah, thank you.